So, Mike, let's start with the obvious question. What is a PFAS? And I should say it's PFAS, but it's PFAS. What is a PFAS?
Well, I just kind of say PFAS for short, but these are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I can hardly say it, but they're basically industrial chemicals that have been used for a variety of different products, and they used to be used in household products, but no longer. That are like surfactants. The best example is Teflon. Your food slides right off it, right? And they have this kind of effect on the viscosity of liquids and things that can be used for a bunch of different stuff. Most notoriously in Teflon and 3M Scotchgard in the example of two products. But there's also hundreds more that are used in firefighting foam and a variety of industrial uses.
Now, my understanding is that this stuff, okay, so some of it is actually used, some of it is actually in these products, and some of it was used to make these products, right?
Yeah, I mean there are industries that use this in manufacturing. There's also types of PFAS chemicals that are put on food packaging because it prevents things from sticking to the package. There's two notorious ones, PFOS and PFOA, and those were used in Teflon and 3M Scotchgard. Those are no longer in use because of widespread contamination near the areas where they were manufactured, and also health concerns about having them in the home. So the federal government has phased those two out, basically by putting pressure on the industry for years. The industry was also faced a number of lawsuits near their manufacturing plants.
In fact, DuPont, I mean, we've talked about the case involving C8 and DuPont. Mike Papantonio's firm did the actual trial work on that, where DuPont was manufacturing Teflon using C8, which I believe was a PFAS, or at least some derivative of it, and they were using it to make Teflon. And 3M, which originally produced it and sold it to DuPont, basically got out of the business because they knew this stuff would not go away. And it said they needed to be burned. And instead, DuPont basically started to dump it out in like some tributary to the Ohio River, I guess. And the problem with that is not only is it toxic at certain levels, highly toxic in some instances, is that it doesn't go away. Will you explain that concept of a forever chemical? Because this is something that I think most people are not fully aware of.
Right. They call them forever chemicals because they are so persistent, not only in the environment, but in the human body. That means these compounds basically refuse to break down over time. And that's why we're seeing such widespread contamination, even at very low levels. Once it gets released into the environment, it doesn't go away because it doesn't decompose like an organic compound would. It just sticks around. So if you eat something with this chemical on it, it could stay in your body for a very long period of time. In fact, some experts say that almost everyone in the United States probably has trace amounts of these chemicals in their body.
Wow. And do we have a sense of like, and it has to do with like the molecular structure of this chemical, right? Like there's too many carbon bonds or something to that effect. I mean, I don't want to pretend like I know anything about science, but that's my understanding, is that there's the molecular structure is such that it just doesn't break down over time.
Yeah, I'm not a chemist, but I do understand how pollution works just from reporting on it across the country. And because these things don't break down, if it gets into a river and that river flows to the lake, it's going to stay in the lake. If it gets into rainwater, that rain could spread it everywhere because it's not going anywhere. I mean, and it's because of the way that they're structured. And, the industry had concerns about this a long time ago, but didn't say anything. This ended up being something that independent researchers and for instance, the case that you talked about, this is stuff that came out through the process of lawsuits and environmentalists looking into it. And essentially researchers are saying, hey, we're going to research this and see what the problem is.
And so we have this chemical that has been, like you say, and I think it was Dark Waters. If people want to go check out that film, basically recounted the story of a derivative of this chemical, and the cases against it. And it's a lifelong, it's an age old story of these corporations, basically privatizing the profits from the use of this chemical and then socializing the cost by basically dumping it into our rivers, dumping it into our soil, and dumping it essentially into our bodies, without obviously our permission. How do researchers have a sense of how this got into our bodies? I mean, is it from using the products? Is it from eating? You talk about it going into a lake. Is it from eating the fish that go in there? I mean, what are the different ways in which this chemical makes it into our systems?
A lot of it has to do with water. Actually, there is legislation in Congress that would require industries to report when they release these chemicals into municipal sewer systems. Right now, there's no federal rules preventing an industrial facility from just letting these chemicals into the municipal water treatment of their local area. Now, across the Midwest, this is just one example, across the Midwest, sewer sludge is actually used as a treatment or a fertilizer on industrial fields. Now, if that sewer sludge has PFAS in it, maybe because people were at some time using it in the household and it was going down the sink, or because there was an industrial release either into the water supply that then ended up in the sewer or directly into the municipal sewer system, rain will come and wash that waste into a tributary, which will go into a stream, which will go into the Mississippi River, and impact all of our watersheds. And this most recent study that I have been reporting on suggests that most surface sources of drinking water, lakes, rivers, streams in the United States are likely contaminated at this point because, like we said, this stuff just doesn't go away. It just moves around. And water is probably one of the easiest ways for it to move around.
You basically walked us through these PFAS or PFAS, which is a class or a family of drugs, which, chemicals, which, because of the way they're structured, do not break down in nature. They do not have a half-life, or to the extent that they have one, it is super, super long. And so when they get dumped into a river or when they get washed off of a field, when they make it into any type of water, they just travel until they land. Maybe they land in a fish, or maybe they land in your faucet, and they end up in the human body. And you were telling us about the most recent study, which shows that basically, more or less, all of our drinking supply is contaminated in some way by these forever chemicals. You were about to tell us about 3 different ways in which they were measuring this. Tell us.
Well, the most recent study took basically a random sampling of large cities to small towns, and it's just testing of their tap water. And these are locations all over the country: Washington, D.C., Boston, Massachusetts, Birmingham, Alabama, New Orleans, where I live. Also small towns like Bergen County, New Jersey, which is a suburb, or Brunswick County in North Carolina, which is a rural area. And so they did a sampling of all these places. And of the 44 places where they took tap water samples, 43 came back positive for some level of PFAS in the drinking water. This is water that comes out of the tap. The only place that did not come back positive was Meridian, Mississippi, where the water for that municipal system is drawn from wells that are very deep below the ground. Everywhere else, like where I live in New Orleans, the water comes from a surface source, a lake or a river. In the case of my community, that would be the Mississippi River, or in Louisville, Kentucky, that would be the Ohio River. So the fact that the only place tested that didn't have any detectable PFAS in it was the one place that had water coming from very deep wells that weren't directly fed by tributaries or river or stream, suggests that this is a widespread phenomenon all over the country, particularly with surface sources of drinking water. There's also been independent research on these chemicals in rainwater that found it to be widespread. And the EPA has done its own review, although it wasn't extensive. They found evidence of PFAS in cities across the country, impacting up to, I believe, 100 million people with those water supplies. Now, the researchers behind this most recent study, the Environmental Working Group, say that their data suggests that it could even be more widespread than that, particularly since every single location that had a drinking source that was a surface source, like a river or lake, came back positive.
So once we determine that this is in all our drinking water, and then thus, like you say, probably in all of our bodies, what are the implications of that? I mean, how much of this do we need to ingest before we start having problems? I mean, I know just from talking to Mike Papantonio and other lawyers associated with that C8 case, which was a PFAS case or a PFAS chemical, that within a certain radius of the manufacturing plant where DuPont had dumped this chemical, you had over 3,500 people with some form of malady that was a function of exposure to this stuff. What do we have a sense of, like, how toxic it is, and how much you need inside your body for that toxicity to manifest itself?
Right. Now, this is the gray area that scientists are still working on, and it's also the area where the industry can inject a lot of its spin into the media because it gets really complicated really fast. Now, from the case that you're talking about with the C8 and Parkersburg, West Virginia, where people in a localized area were exposed to really high levels of this stuff, we know from research on them and their bodies and their maladies that PFAS can increase the risk of cancer. It can harm the development of the fetus in the womb. It can reduce the effectiveness of vaccines and also have impacts on the liver and the immune system. So we know that, but to what levels does it reach a danger threshold? And that's really tough to tell. The EPA has really only looked at the two most notorious ones, PFAS and PFOA, right? Those are DuPont and 3M's famous chemicals. Now, the EPA set a non-enforceable, that means this really has no weight of law behind it, limit for those two at 70 parts per trillion. But that's only two of them, right? And this is a class of up to 600 compounds. There is a debate among scientists whether the other ones are just as dangerous, particularly the ones that are currently being used in food packaging, right? They're related to these dangerous chemicals, but there hasn't been the research yet to show us whether they are actually dangerous or not. So scientists right now are scrambling to figure all this out. The Environmental Working Group suggests that actually the threshold, the health limit should be 1 part per trillion for all of these, for the entire family, not just the two that the EPA is saying. So it really is a huge debate. Now, of course, if the
that's EPA 70, EPA is saying, I mean, I'm not a math whiz, but the EPA is saying you can have 70 times more than activists are saying is healthy. Well, that's quite a wide disparity. It doesn't look like the EPA. What's going on with the EPA? Are they just not able to sort of pick up on the science? Are they getting pressure? What's the story?
They're absolutely under pressure, and they're actually facing a really big problem. If they start making enforceable limits for this stuff, that means they're going to have to start enforcing the law. That means that companies might be required to clean up this pollution. That would be very expensive for the private companies. It also means municipal water systems might have to install really expensive filtration technology to keep this out of our tap water. Actually fixing this problem is going to take a lot of money that nobody really wants to spend. And that explains why Democrats in the House were able to pass sweeping legislation to address this that would require the EPA to set an enforceable limit within 2 years and then start the process of cleaning up the whole country. And it would also hold the polluters to account and force them to pay to clean this up. Now, the Trump administration has threatened to veto this, and the Senate Republicans refuse to pick it up because they know that it would require spending a huge amount of money and it would have a huge impact on private industry. So instead, they have their own PFAS action plan at the EPA. Unfortunately, it's just not moving along fast enough. Basically, the last I checked, they had submitted a proposal to consider a classification for these substances that is now under interagency review. Basically, if you had talked to environmentalists, the bureaucracy is dragging its feet while the problem gets worse and worse.
Okay, and so and what is the name of that bill? Do you know what that bill in the House is, so people can follow it?
Right. The bill is the PFAS Action Act of 2019. And there's other legislation, too. Like I said, there's also a bill that would require the industry to notify the government where they're putting these chemicals into our municipal water supply. At this point, you can just send these, wastewater contaminated with this stuff to the local wastewater treatment plant without saying anything about it.
And the
now,
wastewater,
there might be local regulations that prevent that, but on the federal level, there's nothing to stop it.
That's nuts. All right. Well, listen, we just have about 45 seconds left. If I'm hearing this and I'm at home and I've got, I've got my kids or I drink a lot of water from my tap because I think the tap water is good, what do I do? I mean, is there something, is there a filter? What do I do?
The Environmental Working Group says that a reverse osmosis filters work best. Those are more expensive. Carbon filters will also help, but maybe aren't as effective. Probably, if you're really worried about it, combining reverse osmosis and carbon filter would be the best way to ensure that your water is completely clear of this stuff. But like I said, some of the concentrations here are really low, and it's so unclear at this point what the health danger is, and that might be one reason why it's so scary.
Michael Littwood, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.